Hi, my name is Andy, and I would like to welcome you back to the Ninox Learning Channel. In this class, we're going to study screen elements. Now, in previous training sessions, we've looked at fields, both data entry fields and table reference or lookup fields, and we've spent a lot of time talking about formulas. There is a third category of elements that we can place on our forms for data entry, for data management, for viewing and manipulating our content. And that third category is called elements. So let's go ahead and get started. Now for this class, I've set up a very simple database that has just this one table, the customer management table. And the customer management table has only one record in it. That's all we need. We're not so much today going to be focused on data entry or data transformation or information or intelligence as much as we're going to focus on the elements, that third category of screen content. Now there are two ways to access the screen elements options. The first one is to enter administrative mode by grabbing our wrench, clicking on the gear in the middle of our screen at the top, and selecting Edit Fields. When we go into the table management or data model window that you see now, on the far right we see three panels. We see our Fields panel, we see our table reference or lookup table or linking panel, and then in the middle of those two we see the layout element or the screen elements panel. There are 8 different elements: tab, header, free text and line break, the space, button, and the view and the chart. We're going to look at each and every one of these today. I want to point out there is a second way to access the screen elements, and this way in some cases is going to be easier for you to use because screen elements do two different things. There's two categories of screen element. There are these screen elements, the tab, header, free text, line break, and space, that really affect how content appears on screen. And then there's another group, the button, the view, and the chart, which actually presents content in and of themselves. So some of these you might want to add when you're actually building the data model. For example, if you know you want to break the screen up into 2 tabs, you might want to add the tab when building your data model. The second way to access the screen elements is by actually going into a form. This is what we call form view. And again, while in administrative mode, and we know we're in admin mode because our tools palette appears right here on the left-hand side of the form, there is the layout element option that you see right here. Clicking layout element brings up the same list of the 8 different screen elements that are available to us. Now the reason that it's sometimes easier to add your screen elements when you're already in form view is because this allows you to use the formatting or the visual appearance elements while you're actually looking at the form. And sometimes that's easier than trying to format the look of a data entry form when you're in data model mode. So we're going to, today for this class, do all of our work using the layout element pop-up tools panel, but just remember you can access the same element options when you are in table management or data model mode by going down here and selecting on the second panel the Add Layout Element panel. So let's begin. Now, the first element we're going to talk about, actually we're going to talk about 2 at the same time, and I'm demonstrating these elements in these sectioned headings. Here we have a screen heading that tells us this is the customer management screen. And below that, we have a section heading which tells us that this is the customer information section of this customer management screen. There are a couple of different ways we can add these section headers or these screen headers to our data management screens. Now, before I go any further, I want to go ahead and maximize my screen space today. So I'm going to create a new view, and we're going to call this our customer management view, and it's going to be the form view. And by doing this, I now have the entire screen to work with. The entire height and width of my screen is now dedicated to this particular form. Now, the problem with doing that, and sometimes you'll go into administrative mode and you won't see your palette. Here's my palette just peeking off the left-hand side of the screen. The reason is the palette appears between the border between our panel or our tools palette on the left and the actual form on the right. I'm going to go back and reopen the palette. This area on the left is the palette. And that palette, that separation between the tools palette on the left and the form itself on the right, that's where this tools window pops up. If you are not displaying the banner or the area on the left, the tools area on the left, then when you go into administrative mode, you may not see your tools palette. The easy way to solve that, click on this icon right here. This icon takes us right back into a split screen mode where we have our modes and tools on the left, the form on the right, and then I promise you'll be able to see your palette. So we're going to use this layout here. Now, the first element that we want to talk about are these header sections or these free text sections. Now, the one that I am using here right now is free text. Free text is exactly that. It is any hard-coded text. It does not result from a formula. It's not content that we enter. It doesn't exist even as content in the table. It is simply text that we use to explain other things that appear on the screen. When we select free text, it appears like this. And again, as you add elements, they will always be added at the bottom of the form. Clicking on the wrench brings up the free text parameters where I can do things like edit the text. This is the screen heading for this data management form. And then I can click on style, and I can style the free text that I just entered. I can make it large. I can make it appear as dark green on a light green background. I can make it bold and center it and even draw borders around it if I want to do that. And I can pick all of the colors. And while that's not a great looking color combination, it gives you an idea of all of the things that we can do with our free text. Now, I will often use free text when designing databases for section headings. For example, and I'm going to get rid of this, here is a section heading. And this section heading is free text. It's a combination of upper and lower case, and the text is being shown in a large size. White letters on a dark gray background, centered with a solid white border of medium thickness. Now, one of the differences between screen text and or free text and the header elements is the size. One of the things that we like to do when we're building our database solutions for our clients is we like to make the screen title, that banner across the very top, a little bit larger than all of the other section headers or section titles that appear on screen. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. Here we've done it using all uppercase, as opposed to this section header, the additional information section header that uses both upper and lower. But this also allows us to call out the primary difference between header text and free text. Watch what I do. I'm going to create a header, and I'm going to drag it all the way to the very top so we can compare header text to free text. And I'm going to give this the exact same content, customer management. I'm then going to go in and, like the customer management banner that's already there, make it large, make it white on a dark gray background, center it with a solid medium border where the border color is white. The exact same style that I applied to the free text. But look at the difference. The header banner, this is the header. While it contains the exact same text, styled and formatted in the exact same manner, it is just slightly larger. The font is 2 points larger, and the element itself from top to bottom is about 6 points taller than the exact same content, styled in the exact same manner in free text. So if you want to have the largest piece of content possible, the largest piece of text possible on the screen, while your choices for free text are the actual free text element or the header element, the header element is the largest element available in Ninox. And again, we could blow this all the way up to very large, and it would look like that. And even when our free text is similarly expanded to very large, it still isn't quite as big. It's just a few pixels smaller than the identical content formatted the same way or styled the same way using a header. So what we will often do is when we want to have a hierarchy of section management, we can have up to 4 levels. We have our header section, which is the biggest. Then we have our free text section, which is kind of a medium size. And then we have our free text section with upper lower case, which is a smaller size. You also can do things like this. We can have free text that is large, and that's just going to be a little bigger than free text that is normal or small. So when you play around by combining header elements with free text elements, you have a lot of control both in the style options and in the fact that header text just begins bigger than free text. You have a lot of options for how you create these labels. The other thing that I want to point out is sometimes you will want your labels to appear with no background at all, effectively an invisible background against the screen, this gray screen that is the standard background color for all Ninox screens. Very easy to do. Pick any element, whether it's free text or formulas or header text. Go into Style, select Background Color, and select the RGB, the red, green, blue option. And for all 3 parameters, the R, red, G, green, and B, blue parameter, you want to use the code 238. 238 for the R, the G, and the B parameter. Select that. When I say select that, click on the color here. Notice what I've done. I have changed the parameter, but if I simply click off the window to close it, my change did not take effect. When changing the background color using the RGB parameters, and again, I'm going to use 238 to give this an invisible background, click on the color that appears here. That will get the change to stick in Ninox. Then click OK, and click OK one more time. Now, what we see is an effectively invisible background, but when you do it this way, you want to use a somewhat darker text. Let's go ahead and make the text very dark gray, and let's make our border very dark gray. And now we get something that looks like that. And if we eliminate the border entirely by simply saying no border at all, the text is effectively floating on the screen. And we can do this with header text as well as styled free text. We'll use a dark background. I'll use black. I'll go into RGB and type 238 as the color parameter in the RGB selector, clicking on the color to select it, and then eliminating the border around our text. And for this one, I'll make it bold. And now we have text floating on the screen with what appears to be no background or a transparent background against the dove gray of the Ninox screen itself. So in discussing screen elements, these header elements and free text elements, they do the same thing. They allow us to place hard-coded alphanumeric content. And by hard-coded, it is not calculated as a formula, and it is not entered via data entry processes. It is simply typed in and pasted on the screen, and as you've just seen here, I can stretch it out and make it as wide as I want. One of the things about free text and header elements, while you can size them horizontally, you cannot size them vertically. And this is what leads me to the next screen element that I want to show you. It's a screen element that we have used before many times, but here's a little tip on how you can use it in a creative manner. And that screen element is the formula. Now, we've talked about formula fields before, and the formula is actually a type of field. It's not a screen element, but I want to show you how you can use formulas to get to them to act like screen elements. And these formulas give you one additional feature that the header element and the free text element does not provide. I'm going to select a formula, and I'm going to give it the same content. Customer management. And I'm going to style it the same way. I'm going to bring it up here next to the other ones. I'm going to click on the wrench in administrative mode. Now I'm going to hide the label because I don't want this field labeled. This formula actually is a label, so we don't need to have a label on a label. I'm going to go into Styled and show it the exact same way. Dark gray on a invisible or transparent background, large centered text with no border. And it appears pretty much the same way the other text appears. I'll go ahead and take off, I'll put this one in the same color so you can see all three options, and we'll take off the bold. So we have all three options. Customer management in large text as a header, customer management as free text, also formatted the same way, large text in the free text element, and then the words customer management actually being built into a formula by embedding the words customer management between quotes. Now, why would I want to use a formula when I already have the header and the free text that do exactly the same thing? As I mentioned, headers and free text can only be sized horizontally, as you see here. If we embed our text, our hard-coded text, into a formula, we not only can size it horizontally for width, we can size it vertically for height. Now, sometimes this will be helpful if you want to have a field label that pushes the fields beneath it or on the same line down. Again, free text and header text cannot be sized for height. Only formulas or formulaic text has that capacity. So here's a little creative use of the formula field. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that now because we really do want to focus on the screen elements today. But when creating this hard-coded free text on your screen, just know that the formula can be used in a pinch when you want not only width adjustability, but height adjustability. So that's two of our screen elements, the header and the free text. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the header. I'll remove the free text component and put things back the way they were just a moment ago, with our screen header at the very top and our section header down below. When setting up screen headers like this, or any kind of section header, I usually encourage people to have some sort of border. If you don't want the border drawn all the way around, you might want to go with just a bottom border so it looks like that. But you want to use the border option. The border option exists in the styling screen. Here we bring up the parameters and we click on Style. Use your borders to differentiate between different sections and different parts of your screen. It'll make the user experience more intuitive, more straightforward, easier for the user to figure out where they are and what they're supposed to be doing. So that's two of our screen elements. With a little tip on how to use the formula in a creative manner, let's look at a few more screen elements, starting with the space element. The space element allows us to take up space in order to get the fields on the screen, whether they are formula fields or table reference fields or data entry fields. Doesn't matter what kind of field it is. We use spaces to get the fields to appear where we want them to. For example, I want customer name, customer code, current status, and business type to all be on the second line or the first line right below the form header, the customer management label. I want the second line to begin with the website field. However, we know from experience that Ninox will always place screen content, whether it's a field or an element or a formula or a lookup field. It will always place the elements one right next to the other, starting in the top left-hand corner, going left to right, and then going down the screen. So you'll note here, if I didn't have this blank space, my website field would appear on the first line. I don't want it there. Now I do have the option of maybe spreading these fields out and making them real large, and this would force, by taking up all of the space on the first row, it would force the website field to be the first field in the second row. But I don't need these fields to be that big. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to click Revert Changes to undo the changes I just made, I'm going to leave these fields in their current width, which is the width that I want, and then and I'll delete this one and show you how we did it, I'm going to select Layout Element, and I'm going to select Space. Layout elements, as I mentioned previously, are always placed at the bottom of the screen. I will grab this new element and drag it into position, taking up all of the area on the first row, forcing the website field to be the first field on the second row. Spaces can be adjusted for width and for height, and spaces can also be made to appear or disappear based on the contents or the conditions elsewhere in our screen. Let me show you when this appearing, disappearing space is actually very useful. I'm going to leave this space here, and I'm going to create a second space. And I'm going to take this space and I'm going to place it right here next to customer code, and I'm actually going to size it out so it is exactly the same width as this customer code field right next to it. Now here's what I want to happen. I only want the customer code field to appear if I have provided a customer name. If there is no customer name, the customer code field should not be visible. But I don't want my fields adjusting and trading positions. So I'm going to set the condition for this space to appear to be this. The customer field is null. There's nothing in the customer field. I'm going to set the condition for the customer code field. That will only display when the customer name field is not null, is not empty. So look at the effect that we have created. When there's a customer name, my customer code field is visible. When there is no customer name, the customer code field disappears, but my status and type fields are remaining in position. They're not moving over to the left taking up the space that has now been vacated by the now invisible customer code field. Add back value or content in the name field, the code field reappears. Using this ability to have spaces appear or disappear and take the place of fields which appear or disappear based on opposite criteria gives us the ability to have what we call dynamic screens. Dynamic means the screen is effectively redrawing itself based on what's relevant at the time. If we haven't given the customer a name, it's not relevant to be asking us to give the customer a code. Once the customer does have a name, then the code field should appear. But what we don't want are the other fields, and I'm going to go ahead and show you what this would look like if I wasn't using this appearing and disappearing space field. If I didn't have that space field, I'd get something that looks like this. Pay attention to the current status and the business type. Now that I fill in the customer name, those fields are moving over. And what you don't want to provide is a user interface or a user experience where fields are changing position and your user has to go looking for them. So that's why I like using that space. The space is an extremely powerful screen element for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is adjustable left, right, and top, bottom, horizontally and vertically. Second of all, by default, when in user mode, when not in administrative mode, spaces are invisible. They have no visual content whatsoever, but they take up space. If you want one thing to appear in one location sometimes, but nothing to appear in that location other times, and you don't want your fields bouncing around, you can use this space. And by setting opposite parameters, and I'll do this once again, by setting the opposite parameter that current status is visible when the customer name is not empty, and this space, and make sure it's the same size, is visible when the customer name is empty. By giving them opposite conditions for appearance or invisibility, we get this effect of the field appearing or disappearing on its own. Let's put things back the way they were. So we've talked in the layout elements about spaces, headers, and free text. Headers and free text kind of do the same thing. They do it in a somewhat different way. The line break screen element sort of does the same thing as the space element. Let me show you that. I can take a line break, and a line break forces everything after it onto the next line. Now, we've already seen this with the screen element of space. We could use a space to take up all the space in one line, thereby forcing things onto the next line. Which begs the question, what do we need the line break for? Line breaks cannot be adjusted for size vertically or horizontally, where spaces can be adjusted in both directions. They can be very short or very tall. They can be very narrow or very wide. The line break was introduced when Ninox was first released many, many years ago. And it was used to effectively create a new line when laying out our forms. At the same time, many, many years ago, when the space element was first introduced, it was only adjustable horizontally, left to right, or thin or thick, narrow or wide. Now that Ninox has introduced the ability for us to adjust this element both vertically and horizontally, and we can make it really narrow, in fact, the exact same height as a line break itself, the use of the line break element has sort of gone down. Because quite frankly, the one thing that a line break does, you can do with a space layout element, and space layout elements do a great deal more because they can be adjusted in every direction, left, right, top, bottom, where a line break element has no size adjustment capability whatsoever. But it's still there, and if you want to use it, we simply place a line break anywhere on the screen, and it will force everything below the break to the next row beneath the line break itself. I'm going to revert changes and get rid of that. So we've looked at our line break and our space, two elements that take up area on the screen. The space is the more flexible of the two because it can be adjusted for width and for height. However, both the line break and the space have a couple things in common. When you're not in administrative mode, they are invisible, they have no content, and they contain no color, no background of any kind. They simply take up space. Then we have the header in the free text, which allows us to place hard-coded or fixed text anywhere on the screen. Headers in free text can be adjusted for size horizontally. They can be adjusted to be very narrow or very wide, and they both can be formatted using the styling options of the color of the text, the background, the size, whether it's italicized or in bold, left, right, or center justified, and if there is a border, we can define the nature of the border, a solid line, a double line, a dotted or a dashed line, and the thickness of the border, and the color of the border, and then where the border appears. All the way around, or maybe only top bottom, maybe only left and right, maybe only bottom left and right. You can toggle these switches on and off. Okay? Remember, however, if you want to place static text and you need to adjust that text not only horizontally for width, as we see here with our free text and with our headers, keep in mind that little tip we talked about earlier where you can set up a formula to contain that static or hard-coded text. And the added advantage is the formula can be adjusted not only for width, but also for height. Let us continue. So in the Layout Element Toolkit, we've looked at our line breaks, our spaces, our headers, and our free text. The last element that I want to look at that is all about the visual, all about the appearance of the screen, is the tab element. Now, the tab element is really quite similar to the line break element. It cannot be adjusted for size, and it pushes everything beneath it to a different area. Where a line break pushes text down one row, a tab element pushes everything beneath it onto another page in our form. Now remember I told you that screen elements can be accessed, edited, and adjusted while in form view by pulling up our toolbox and selecting the element pop-up, or they can be added when in table management or data model mode. I'm going to go to the layout element panel, this middle panel on the right, and I'm going to add a tab. Now, tabs are one of those elements that are best added in data model or table management mode, and here's why. When I place a tab, for example, I will place a tab right after the notes field and just prior to the account number field. I'm going to call this tab page 2. Tabs don't contain content, but they can be labeled. This is the first difference between a tab and a line break. Line breaks cannot be labeled. Tabs can be labeled. The second difference is where a line break pushes everything beneath it. All of the fields beneath a line break get pushed down one row on the same page. The tab element pushes everything onto a new page that looks like this. Here's my page 2, and here are all of the fields that came after the tab element in the data model for this table. Here's page 1. Page 1 ends with notes. Here's page 2. Page 2 begins with account number. And that makes sense because notes is the last field prior to the tab, and account number is the first field after the tab. This makes notes the last field of page 1, and account number the first field of page 2. And the tab itself is the page break. Some things we can do with tabs: first of all, we can name them, we can label them, and second of all, we can affect the color on the screen of the successive pages. Here's page 2. I want page 2 to appear with this sort of washed out yellow, tan, cream colored background. I can add that cream colored background by pulling up the parameters of the tab, selecting color, and selecting the color I want. Click OK, save my changes, and here we see page 2 appearing with this proper background, while page 1 has the gray background that is the standard or default background color. When we exit administrative mode, those spaces become invisible. They have no color content whatsoever. So tabs allow us to draw screens where we can affect, we can control the background color of the screen. Tabs also insert successive pages after the first page. Now I've reset my screen back to the way it was before we got started, and I'm going to go back into administrative mode. And let's now look at a couple of additional screen elements. We've looked at the line break, the space, the header, the free text, and now the tab. Remember, line break pushes things down one row, where the tab pushes things onto a subsequent page. Spaces take up space and allow us to force things into the areas that we want. Spaces are adjustable vertically and horizontally. And the header and free text allow us to place hard-coded static text on the screen, headers being slightly larger than free text. Both of these elements are adjustable horizontally. If you want to adjust also vertically, you can use the formula to embed static text also. So this takes us to our next set of elements: the button, the view, and the chart. The button is exactly that. It is a clickable element on the screen. This is what we call an interactive element. Interactive elements can take the form of combo boxes, or check boxes, or data fields. This interactive element is unique, however, in that it is, in and of itself, a trigger. Now, where have we seen triggers before? We have seen triggers here at the database level, where we could have a trigger when the database is open. We have seen triggers at the table level, where we can affect activity or cause code blocks to be executed when new records are created, or when any record is changed or updated in this table. In addition, we've seen triggers at the field level. We can trigger an event to take place, a block of code to be executed, anytime the content of this single field is changed, modified, or edited. And now we introduce the fourth type of trigger. We had database triggers, table triggers, field triggers. Now we have a user-definable trigger. This trigger is pulled. The code associated with this button is executed whenever we want. All we have to do is click the button. All we have to do is click the button. So let me give you an example of this. I'm going to place a yes/no field on the screen. And what I want to do is I want to flip the yes/no field on or off every time I click this button. I'm going to change the yes/no field to be a switch, and I'm going to write a very simple line of code. If the yes/no field is true, then make it false. Else, if it's not true, make it true. And we'll end the loop. I'm going to go back in and look at this, and it says very simply, if this is yes, then make it no. If this is not yes, which means it's already no, then change it to yes. This is simply what we call a switch, like an on-off switch. Now watch what we can do. Every time I flip the switch, it flips the value, it switches the value of the yes/no field. I have assigned a block of code to this button. It's a very simple block of code. It's one line, it's a simple if-then structure. And what the block of code does is it evaluates the current state of this yes/no field, and whatever it is, it flips it to the opposite. If it's yes, it flips it to no. And if it's no, it flips it to yes. So this is an easy way to build a switch, but more importantly, this is an example, a very simple, basic example of how you can create user-definable triggers. Triggers that are not based on the adding or modifying of content at the database, table, or field level, but triggers that are affected when we, the user, want them to be affected, and we indicate that we want a trigger to be pulled simply by clicking the button, and then all of the code associated with that button. And by associated, I mean all of the code in the formula parameter of the button will then be executed. And again, in this case, we've built a nice little switch where that one line of code just says, whatever the yes/no field is before you click it, make it the other after you click it. If it's yes now, make it no. And if it's no now, make it yes. Okay, so let's go back into administrative mode and let's look at the last two elements. Remember, I told you that screen elements come in really kind of two flavors. There is the how it looks flavor, and that's our line breaks and spaces, our header and free text, and our tab. And then there is the functional flavor. This is all about form. These 5 elements are all about form. These 3 elements are about function. The first element, the button, is the user-definable trigger. The other 2, the view element and the chart element, do the same thing. They serve as a window that allows us to look out at content in other tables of our database. Tables that may or may not be linked or related to the current table, in this case, the customer management table. And they do something else. They allow us to look inwards at our current table. For example, here we are looking at a single record in the customer management table. Let's go back and look at these last 2 layout elements, the view and the chart. They allow us to look at table content. The table that we are looking into can be our current table, or it can be a different table. And that different table may or may not be related. If that other table is a child table, then the child multi-record listing will appear automatically. But what if we want to see row by row all of the records of a table within this form view, and maybe it's not a child table, or maybe it's not even a related table? We can do that using one of these 2 views. And the beautiful thing about this is we can be looking at one record in a table and see all of the records in the table at the same time. Let me show you that. So now we have all of these customers. I want to be able to look at one customer and see all of the data, all of the fields for that customer. And even when I'm in customer management mode, the full screen mode, I still want to be able to see a list of all my other customers. For that, we use a view. We go into Layout Element while in administrative mode, select View, and we simply say, as the formula, select and the name of table, Customer Management. We can pick which fields we want to appear, the customer name, code, status, and type, and there we have it. So here we have a view of the one record, all of the information about Enzo Ferrari, but here is all of the other records in the table. So I can be looking at this and quickly go see Henry Ford, and then pop over to see Gottlieb Daimler, and then go check on his partner Carl Benz. I want to create a view that shows me all of the content in the vendor table while looking at the customer table. You will note, as we look at the data model, these two tables are not linked. One is not a child of the other, and there's no outer join linking these two stacks or table families. They are completely independent of each other. All that they have in common is they exist within the structure of the same database. I want to be here in customer management and see all of the vendors in vendor management. I can do that with a screen element called a view. I'm here in vendor management. I go to Layout Element, select View, and this view should be a selection of all of the records in the other table, vendor management. I can select which fields I want to see by clicking Edit Columns. I want to see the name and the code. That's it. And there we have it. Now, there is no name. I only gave them a code. So I'm going to grab the code column and move it over to the left. You can do that within embedded views. And there we have a view embedded into one form of one table, in this case, the customer management table. And that view is a window through which we can see the contents of a different table. Examples and samples of where you'd want to use this capability is maybe you have a customer table and an invoices table, and you want to see all of the invoices for each customer. The invoice table is not a child of the customer table. It is a separate stack, a separate data family. So therefore, by using a view and by embedding a window into the invoices table right here on the customer table, you can see all invoices by customer. Other situations, maybe you have a particular piece of inventory and you want to see two views, all the customers that have purchased that inventory and all the purchase orders where you brought that inventory into your organization. You can do that with views. But keep in mind, views display in alphanumeric form the content of the fields themselves in the table that we are looking into. The other kind of view, and the last layout element, is a chart. A chart is a graphic representation of the same content you would otherwise see in a view. Let me show you how this might look. The beautiful things about views are not only that you can have a window into another table, irrespective of the relationship that other table may or may not have with the current table, but you can have multiple windows into the same table. Well, here we've created a dashboard. This dashboard consists of nothing but view elements. There are, in fact, no fields in the data model. We have one formula, we've got a couple of header text elements, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 views. This dashboard consists of different screen headers, invoice ledger by name, invoice ledger by region. You will note that both of these are simply formatted free text. Then we have two views. One view is selecting the invoices table, and it is sorting that or grouping that content by customer name. We have a second view, which is selecting the exact same table, selecting the invoices table, but this time the content is being grouped by region. And then we have this third view. This third view is a chart view. And you will note that it is selecting data from the invoice summary table, and it's showing me the same information. Here I'm seeing all of my invoices by customer name, and I will exit admin mode. Here I'm seeing the same content, customer invoices, but this time by region. And yes, I can blow up each grouping to see just the detail within that group. For example, here's A-space invoices, here's purple bar invoices. Here's my Midwest customer invoices, here's my Southwest customer invoices. This third view is a special kind of view. It is the layout element of a chart. And instead of presenting the content, instead of being a window into the rows and columns, the records and the fields of the selected table, it is giving me a graphic or charted presentation, a data visualization of the table that we are viewing, in this case, the summary table. If you go back in the Ninox Learning Channel library, the class that we did last week talked all about data visualizations. Everything we learned in that class can be used in a chart layout element. And if you go back even further, you'll see a lot of videos and training classes that talk about how we can edit views, we can move columns around, we can go in and change the grouping and change the order. Everything that we know about viewing content is also applicable to this, the view element. I'm going to revert the changes and undo everything we just did to bring us back to here. And let us review what we've learned about our screen elements today. There are 8 screen elements. The line break and the tab are similar in that they move data to a lower position. The line break moves it lower by 1 row. The tab moves it over by 1 full page. Tabs can be labeled and colorized. Line breaks cannot. Line breaks and spaces are similar in that they take up space on the page or the form. Line breaks cannot be adjusted for width or height. Headers and free text allow us to print or produce static text hard-coded onto the screen. Free text is a few points smaller than header text. So combining header and free text elements with uppercase and lowercase, with very large and normal and small text sizes in the styling parameter, we can create different kinds of screen labels and field labels and element labels. And don't forget, you can always have that invisible background if you go into the label, into the style, into the background color, and under RGB, you enter the code 238. And when you do that, you may want to go ahead and get rid of your border, and this will give the visual impression of data simply floating on the screen. Those were our visual or formatting elements. The 3 content elements, the button, that's our user-definable trigger. The view and the chart, that is our window into a different table. Whether it's a linked table or not, doesn't matter. We can use views as windows into other tables, and through those windows we can see records and fields as we see here and here. And those are all of our layout elements. They are easy to use, in most cases require no coding whatsoever. If you're using a chart or a table view, that single line of code, select table name, that's all you need. But layout elements are very easy to work with. I'm going to go back to the database we started with. And remember, we have elements that allow us to label the sections of our screen. We have triggers that make things happen exactly when we want them to happen. We have views that allow us to see content in other tables, both alphanumerically or graphically. We have spaces that take up space. And of course, we have the line breaks and the tabs, which allow us to move things around either on the current page of our form or into multiple successive pages of our form. This concludes our discussion of screen elements. I hope you learned a lot, and I encourage you to get creative. Get creative with spaces that are tall and narrow and wide and thin. Get creative with how you use views to create dashboards and scorecards and a variety of business intelligence assets, all within this incredibly powerful Ninox solution ecosystem. I appreciate you joining us here today for this class on the Ninox Learning Channel. I hope you'll come back and join us for our next class. Thanks so much for being part of the Ninox community, and thank you for joining me here today. Bye-bye, everybody.